I pulled into my driveway, expecting the usual sight of my home, a peaceful green space surrounded by the trees I had taken care of for years. But something was wrong. At first, I thought I had pulled into the wrong house. The yard looked empty, stripped bare, like a piece of land waiting to be built on. Then it hit me. My trees, all of them, were gone. Not trimmed, not pruned, completely wiped out, as if they had never existed. The stumps were scattered like gravestones, fresh sawdust still covering the ground. The air smelled of cut wood, the kind of smell you'd notice after a storm tears through a forest. But there was no storm. Someone had done this on purpose. My stomach tightened as I stepped out of the car, trying to process what I was looking at. Who would have the audacity to walk onto my property and do this? That's when I saw it. The HOA's truck parked smugly on the side of the street, their logo plastered on the door like a badge of unchecked power. And standing beside it, watching me with a satisfied little smile, was her, the HOA president. She had always been a problem, the kind of person who treated the neighborhood like her own personal kingdom. Petty rules, endless fines, constant interference. She pushed and she pushed, always expecting people to back down. But today, she had pushed the wrong person. She thought she could get away with it, that I was just another homeowner who would roll over and accept it. What she didn't know? I'm a federal judge, and she just broke the law in front of the worst possible person. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the HOA was a nightmare. It wasn't just about keeping the community nice, it was about control. They had a rule for everything. How short your grass could be, what color your front door had to be, even what kind of decorations you could put outside. If they didn't like something, they would find a reason to fine you. It didn't matter if you had lived there for years or just moved in. No one was safe from their nitpicking. But up until that day, they had never directly messed with me. Sure, I got their letters in the mail, the usual nonsense about community standards and maintaining a uniform look. At first, it was just suggestions, a polite notice that my trees were out of sync with the rest of the neighborhood. Then came the violations. Official-looking papers claiming my yard was non-compliant because my trees didn't match their perfect little vision. I ignored them. Every single one went straight into the trash. They even tried sending fines, but I never paid them. They had no authority over my property, and they knew it. The problem was, they didn't care. The HOA president, the woman who made it her personal mission to control everything, was determined to push me, just like she pushed everyone else. But I wasn't like the other homeowners. I wasn't scared of her. I didn't argue, didn't respond, didn't play into her power trip. I just didn't care. And that's what probably drove her crazy. Most people fought back, tried to reason with the HOA, or begged to have their violations removed. I did none of that. I treated their rules like background noise, something to ignore because it didn't matter to me. I had paid for my house in cash, never signed a contract with the HOA, and legally, they had no right to tell me what I could or couldn't do. But power-hungry people like her don't like being ignored. She wanted control. And when she realized she couldn't force me to follow her rules, she decided to take what she wanted. And that's when she made her first big mistake. When I stepped out of my car, the first thing I noticed was the silence. My yard had always been full of life, the rustling of leaves, the soft hum of wind moving through the branches. But now, nothing. Just an eerie stillness. The ground was covered in sawdust, thick and fresh, like someone had dumped bags of it all over my property. The air was heavy with the smell of cut wood, sharp and raw, the kind that lingers after something has been destroyed. Then I saw the stumps, jagged, rough, some of them still dripping sap, as if the trees were bleeding. These weren't just some overgrown bushes that had been trimmed back. They had taken everything. My yard, once shaded by trees that had stood for decades, was now an empty, barren space. It looked unnatural, wrong, like a piece of land that had been ripped apart and left for dead. For a few seconds, I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake. Maybe a storm had hit while I was gone. Maybe the city had done some kind of emergency removal. But deep down, I knew better. And when I turned my head and saw that truck parked across the street, my stomach dropped. The HOA logo was printed proudly on the side, like a signature at the bottom of a crime scene. And then, as if she had been waiting for me, she stepped out, the HOA president. Smiling. Smug. Arms crossed like she was proud of herself, like she had done me a favor. She didn't look the least bit guilty. If anything, she looked satisfied, as if she had finally fixed the one house in the neighborhood that refused to fall in line. She took a slow step forward, tilting her head like she was about to explain something simple to a child. "Oh, good, you're home," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We had to take care of those trees. They weren't in line with community standards." I didn't respond. Not yet. I just stared at her, my mind racing. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't explaining. She expected me to accept this, to nod and move on like she hadn't just invaded my property and destroyed it. She had no idea what she had just done. But she was about to find out. She walked toward me with that same smug look, the kind of expression people wear when they think they've won. Her hands were neatly folded in front of her, her posture relaxed, as if this was just another day of handling neighborhood business, like she hadn't just committed a crime. "We were just making sure everything stays within community standards," she said, her voice sweet but hollow, like she was explaining something obvious, something I should be grateful for. She even had the nerve to tilt her head slightly, like she expected me to nod in agreement. I didn't. I just stood there, quiet, letting the weight of the situation settle in. She was waiting for an outburst. She wanted yelling, accusations, an emotional reaction she could twist against me. But I wasn't going to give her that. Instead, I spoke calmly. "You trespassed onto my property. You destroyed my trees. And you think this is legal?" For a split second, I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. She wasn't expecting that. But then, just as quickly, she recovered, waving a hand dismissively. "The HOA has the authority to regulate the aesthetics of the neighborhood," she said, her voice smooth, practiced. "Your trees were out of compliance." I almost laughed. She really thought she had everything under control. She thought that just because she had bullied the other homeowners into submission, she could do the same to me. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just smiled. Because unlike her, I actually knew the law, and she had just broken it in front of the worst possible person. I didn't waste time. The moment I walked into my house, I went straight to my office and pulled up the security camera footage. Every second of their crime was recorded. The trucks pulling up, the workers stepping onto my property, chainsaws roaring as they cut down tree after tree. I zoomed in on the footage, making sure the HOA logo on the vehicles was crystal clear. There was no way they could claim this was a misunderstanding. Next, I dug through my files. I had saved every single notice, every letter they had sent me over the years. Warnings about my trees, threats of fines, empty attempts at intimidation. They had been trying to push me for months. And now I had proof that they had finally crossed the line. But the real nail in their coffin? The before and after photos. I had pictures of my yard from just a few weeks ago. Lush, green, perfectly maintained. And now? A wasteland. Those images alone were damning. They showed that my trees weren't diseased or dangerous. The HOA hadn't done this for safety. They had done it for control. That was just step one. Step two was even better. I started digging into property records, zoning laws, HOA regulations. And just as I suspected, the HOA had no legal authority over my house. When I bought my home, I had never signed an agreement putting me under their rules. My property wasn't even listed within their jurisdiction. They had no right to touch a single blade of grass, let alone cut down my trees. But it didn't stop there. Step 3 was where things got really interesting. As a federal judge, I knew exactly where to look when it came to financial records. HOAs collect money from homeowners for community maintenance, and legally, they have to document how that money is used. I filed a request for their financial reports, and what I found was shocking. Large payments to landscaping companies that didn't exist. Money transfers that led straight to personal accounts. HOA fees going up every year with no clear explanation. The numbers didn't add up. And every single shady transaction had one thing in common: the HOA president's signature. She thought she had power. She thought she was untouchable, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Now it was time to bring her down. I didn't go straight to court. Not yet. First, I wanted to see just how deep this rot went, and I knew exactly where to start. The neighbors. For years, I had watched them grumble about the HOA, whisper complaints at gatherings, shake their heads every time a new fee or rule was introduced. But none of them had proof. They had suspicions, frustration, but nothing concrete. Until now. I started small, calling over a few neighbors I knew were already unhappy. I didn't start with accusations or demands. I simply laid out the facts, the security footage, the financial records, the proof that the HOA had no legal authority over my property, meaning all those fines and threats they had sent others might not be legal either. At first, there was silence. Then, the anger set in. Wait, so all those landscaping fees were fake, one of them muttered, staring at the numbers. We've been paying higher fees for nothing? Another asked, his face darkening. They flipped through the documents, eyes widening with each new piece of proof. The missing money, the fake companies, the unexplained transactions? It was all right there. Word spread fast. Within days, quiet complaints turned into open revolt. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down started demanding answers. They knocked on doors, compared their own HOA notices, started questioning everything. And the HOA president? She wasn't prepared for this. She had spent years ruling through fear, assuming no one would ever challenge her. But now, the entire neighborhood was turning against her. And the best part? I hadn't even made my real move yet. The HOA was in full panic mode. They called an emergency meeting, hoping to calm everyone down before things spiraled even further out of their control. It was a last-ditch effort, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The meeting was held in the small community clubhouse, a space that was usually reserved for holiday parties and neighborhood get-togethers. But tonight, it felt different. The air was heavy, the crowd restless. People weren't here for a friendly discussion. They wanted answers. The HOA president stood at the front, her usual smug confidence cracked at the edges. She put on her best concerned leader act, speaking in that condescending tone she always used when pretending to care. There have been some misunderstandings, she began. I know there are concerns about finances, and I assure you, everything is being handled appropriately. I almost laughed. She still thought she could control the narrative. That's when I stood up. I didn't say a word at first. I just walked to the front of the room and placed a thick stack of papers on the table beside her. The crowd fell silent. These, I said, tapping the documents, are financial reports showing exactly where our HOA fees have been going, or more accurately, where they've been disappearing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see people craning their necks, trying to get a look at the numbers. The proof was right there. And this, I continued, pulling out another paper, is a violation notice from the city. It confirms that the trees on my property were removed illegally. The HOA will be facing thousands of dollars in fines. That's when the shouting started. People were furious. They weren't just angry about my trees anymore. They were angry about the years of unexplained fees, the lies, the control, the way they had been treated like children in their own homes. The president's face turned pale. She tried to regain control, stammering out weak excuses. There must be a mistake. We were just following policy. This is all being blown out of proportion. Then her phone rang. She hesitated, but she had no choice but to answer. The room fell dead silent as we all watched her face shift from panic to pure horror. The government had frozen the HOA's funds. An official investigation had begun. It was over. The fallout was fast and brutal. Within weeks, the HOA was officially dissolved. The investigation uncovered everything: the financial fraud, the illegal fees, the blatant abuse of power. With the HOA's funds frozen and lawsuits piling up, there was nothing left to salvage. The board crumbled. As for the president, she ran. One day, she was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. The next, her house was up for sale, and she was gone, disappeared without a word. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a hurried escape, like someone who knew the walls were closing in. With the old regime gone, the neighborhood elected a new HOA board. This time it was made up of people who actually cared about the community, not controlling it. Rules became reasonable, fees became fair, and people could finally enjoy their own homes without fear of ridiculous fines or sudden violations. Things finally felt normal. And me? I stayed exactly where I was. I never had to yell. I never had to threaten. I never had to play dirty. I just did what I do best, used the law against those who thought they were above it. And every time I look at my yard, I don't feel anger. Because where my trees once stood, justice took root instead. If you enjoyed this story of justice served, don't forget to like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. It really helps keep these stories coming. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA? Maybe a ridiculous fine? A petty rule? Or even something as extreme as this? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Oh, and trust me, this isn't the only time someone thought they could get away with breaking the law. I've got another wild legal revenge story coming soon. You won't believe how this one ends. Stay tuned.